By the time of the death of the King of France, Francis I, the Italian wars had definitely become a conflict on a European scale between the Habsburgs and the Valois dynasties, turning the Italian peninsula into a secondary battlefront for the two powers, as a new generation of rulers came to oversee the last conflicts in this series of wars. Welcome to our last chapter on the Italian Wars, covering the war from 1551 to its conclusion and the Battle of Saint-Quentin. Nobody likes sponsors cutting into the video's flow, but a channel like ours can't survive without sponsors. At some point, we'd like to stop relying on the sponsors and present our videos sponsor-free to everyone. To do that, we need at least 10,000 YouTube channel members and patrons. Your kind support is always appreciated. We would not be able to create so many videos without you. Channel members and patrons get weekly exclusive videos, like our finished series on the Peloponnesian War, and the ongoing series on the Italian Wars of Unification, Risorgimento, as well as the Anabasis of Xenophon and the history of Prussia, as well as many interesting non-serialized videos. Our supporters also get our schedule, early access to the videos, access to our exclusive Discord, and much more. Thank you for supporting us. The new French king, Henri II, although interested in keeping the Savoyard territories, was more focused on his northern border and supported the Scottish struggle to fend off English encroachment. He also continued his father's policy of aligning his interests with those of the Ottoman sultans and supporting the German Protestant princes, as he held a grudge for the way Charles V had treated him and his brother in the years they were held as hostages in Madrid. In the aftermath of the Italian War of 1542 to 1546, Emperor Charles had to once again maintain the balance of power. Ever more tired with the conflict on the Apennine Peninsula, he was more interested in combating Suleiman the Magnificent and the German Protestants, but as he was getting older, also had to contend with the tensions running high among the Habsburgs over the inheritance of his empire. He delegated most of the Italian responsibilities to his lieutenants, who were often arrogant towards the old Italian aristocracy, making few friends there. The most important of these was the new governor of Milan, Ferrante Gonzaga, who was the champion of the Italo-Spanish interests in Charles's court, competing for influence with the Imperial Burgundian faction. The prior believed that Milan and Piedmont were vital for the crown's interest, while the latter saw it as a drain of resources to defend them. Gonzaga also came to clash with the ambitions of Pope Paul and the nepotistic machination he was preparing for his family members. He had already attempted to put his son, Pierluigi Farnese, on the Milanese throne, and in 1545 he had given him Parma and Piacenza as two duchies to rule for himself. Charles was quite unhappy with this, as he considered the two cities as part of the Milanese state. In 1547, a conspiracy organized by Gonzaga succeeded in assassinating Pierluigi, and Piacenza was swiftly occupied by the Imperials. However, Pierluigi's son, Ottavio Farnese, entered the city of Parma, where he was accepted as lord and refused to surrender it. Other areas where Gonzaga attempted to expand imperial influence were Genoa and especially Siena. The historically pro-imperial Tuscan town had some particularly turbulent years, stuck between the papal state and the Florentines, and had to juggle between the Medici's ambitions to take over the city, not to mention a number of other attempts to become governors of the city by others, and the machinations of the emperor to assert direct control over the city. The imperial representatives in the city had caused some uprisings by attempting to take control of coastal forts and to build a fortress in Siena, not to mention the request to quarter troops in the town. The arrogant and bullying attitude of the Imperials would soon backfire, as more and more princes saw the Spanish presence in Italy as tyrannical. The situation in Emilia remained complicated in the later years of the 1540s. Pope Paul urged Charles to restore Piacenza to him, but did not dare to take any military actions, and instead attempted to gain Henri of France's support, whose daughter, Diane, had married Ottavio's brother, Orazio. Pope Paul died in November 1549, and although his successor Julius III confirmed Ottavio's possession of Parma, the Farnese did not feel secure and sought French support. Both Julius and Charles were not particularly keen on going to war, but in May 1551, Henri had sent his agents to the region, and Gonzaga responded by raiding Parma's countryside. The Pope sent an army under his nephew to Bologna, and they started to besiege Mirandola, while Gonzaga took Colorno. Thus, another Italian war started, with a proxy war, called the War of Parma, between the Farnese, supported by Henri, and Pope Julius, supported by Charles. In September, Gonzaga had to hurry to Piedmont as King Henri had now officially declared war. French columns advanced into the region and took a few towns, but when Gonzaga arrived, the situation developed into a stalemate because of the chronic lack of funds on both sides until more French volunteers arrived. In Emilia, as continuous skirmishes took place, the siege of Mirandola was going poorly, and the Imperials did not have enough men to blockade Parma. The war was proving too costly for the Pope, so he came to terms with Henri in April 1552, signing a truce with him and Ottavio, and Charles joined in a month later. The truce did not cover Piedmont, where the war continued as Gonzaga invaded Saluzzo, but other events in Europe forced Gonzaga to go on the defensive. Charles and his forces were in fact on the back foot. In August 1551, the Ottomans had besieged and taken Tripoli from the Knights Hospitaller, who were under Spain's protection. In 1552, Henri had concluded an alliance with the Protestant princes of the empire, and a combined attack was made against the empire. In March, the French king advanced into Lorraine and took possession of the three bishoprics, Metz, Toul and Verdun, but failed to take Strasbourg, while simultaneously Albert of Brandenburg attacked Augsburg and Maurice of Saxony descended upon Tyrol, forcing Charles to escape from Innsbruck, which was a huge blow to the emperor's prestige. Charles's brother and the heir apparent of the empire, Ferdinand, made peace with the Luther princes, granting them religious freedom, which would be confirmed by Charles in 1555 with the Peace of Augsburg. The peace allowed Charles to assemble a force of 50,000 men and besiege Metz in September of 1552. The town was defended by the Duke of Guise, who resisted until January, when sickness and deserters had done the hard work for the defenders and decimated the imperial camp, so Charles lifted the siege. Campaigns also took place on the northern French border in 1553, where the young Duke of Savoy, Emanuele Filiberto, was showing great leadership as a general, and in 1554, where Charles fought for the last time in person at the Battle of Ronti. By this time, Charles had begun to suffer from depression, and between 1554 and 1556, he gradually transferred his states and responsibilities to his son Philip, although he did not completely give up his influence and would often quarrel with his son, while his brother Ferdinand became the new Holy Roman Emperor. Meanwhile, in Italy, imperial representative Mendoza incessantly bullied Siena to have the fort built to guard it, which in July 1552 gave rise to a revolt, supported by all factions and classes in the city, which was quite a feat. The revolt soon expelled the Spanish garrison in the city, and the Francophile princes and exiles in Italy, meeting at Chioggia, saw this as an opportunity to rid Tuscany of imperial presence and sent reinforcements to the city, while the allies of Charles, the Pope and the de' Medici also reacted. The Sienese and Spanish quickly reached an agreement that allowed them to destroy the fortress and get rid of the garrison, but the Spaniards still planned to send an army to Tuscany, both to punish the rebellious city and to distract Henri of France from the northern battlefields. However, the allied Turco-French fleet stationed around the island of Ponza defeated the imperial navy, and only when it left at the start of winter could the Spanish begin to ship men to Italy. The Spanish expedition spent 6 months brutally sacking the countryside and miserably failing to take Montalcino in a siege, and soon retreated to defend from the Ottoman raids. The French and the Ottoman fleets under Dragut continued to wreak havoc on the Italian coast, not without controversy between the two sides, and stretched the Spanish supply lines. In 1553, at Porto Ercole, the French ferried troops to the Genoese-held Corsica, which France wanted to use as a springboard into Tuscany, while the Ottomans pillaged Elba and later massacred the garrison of Bonifacio. However, as the French tried to limit Dragut's raiding, collaboration between the two fleets broke down. The invasion of Corsica was successful in the beginning, but the Genoese soon retaliated, taking most of the island the following year. Only in 1555 a new Turkish fleet would assist the French in some unsuccessful sieges. The skirmishes would continue to the end of the war. Meanwhile, Cosimo de' Medici decided to take the situation into his own hands on the imperial side. After having failed to resolve the situation diplomatically, he raised an army, and by portraying himself as a loyal vassal defending the honor of the empire, gained the approval of Charles to hold the conquered territory temporarily. The Sienese were now commanded by the Florentine exile Piero Strozzi, sent by Henri. He was a member of the rival plutocratic party, antagonist to Cosimo, and hoped to expel the de' Medicis from Florence. Cosimo's army was led by the Marquis of Marignano, Giangiacomo Medici, who encamped north of Siena to blockade the city by ruthlessly ravaging the territory. Strozzi decided to counterattack to alleviate some pressure from the siege, and he hoped to stir unrest in Florence. He first went to Valdinievole and later to Valdichiana, where he failed to take Arezzo. Pursued by Giangiacomo Medici, the French Sienese force was intercepted at Marciano della Chiena, and at the Battle of Scannagallo, the army of Siena was destroyed, and with it its hope of freedom. The siege continued until April 1555, when Siena capitulated to Cosimo, while the French troops and 700 citizens went to Montalcino to resist as the Republic of Siena in Montalcino. Philip, desperate to have some allies in Italy, granted Cosimo the government of Siena. Henri did not help Siena much because he gave higher priority to Piedmont, where the French and their commander Brissac found much success. After Gonzaga had retreated in summer 1552, the French retook the lost ground, and in spring 1553 they could threaten Liguria. In the autumn, Vercelli, the administrative centre of the remnant Duchy of Savoy, was briefly occupied and raided by the French. In 1554, Gonzaga was recalled to Brussels, but his replacement did not have much military experience, and Brissac was quick to take advantage of this by conquering Ivrea and Casale. The arrival of one of the best imperial commanders, the Duke of Alba, did not improve the situation in Lombardy, as he could not pay the troops. By the start of 1556, France was in control of nearly all of Piedmont. In Rome, Pope Julius died in March 1555 and was succeeded by Pope Paul IV. Coming from Naples, he envisioned an Italy free of Spanish influences, and soon entered into an alliance with the King of France, offering him Milan and Naples. The king's favourite, Francis, Duke of Guise, laid the groundwork for a French descent into Italy, hammering out the details of the league with the Pope and the Duke of Ferrara. Meanwhile, the Constable of France, Montmorency, who was strongly against undertaking an Italian expedition, convinced Henri to sign a truce in Vaucelles with Philip in February 1556. Pope Paul, unhappy with the newly signed truce, provoked the Spanish by harassing their supporters, the main target being the Colonna family, who had their estates confiscated and ceded to the Pope's family members. In September 1556, the governor of Naples, the Duke of Alba, preemptively attacked the Papal State. He swiftly advanced, leaving behind fortified positions heading for Rome. After the city was besieged, an armistice was signed, and Alba left a few garrisoned castles around Rome as he waited for the Pope and Philip to reach an agreement. This agreement was never signed, as in January of 1557, The Duke of Guise had traversed the Alps to come to help the Pope. After helping the French forces in Piedmont to take the town of Valenza, the French commander, uncertain on what to do, went to Rome to assess the situation, where the Pope encouraged him to head for Naples. Advancing along the Adriatic coast, the French army was stopped at the first roadblock at Civitella and left in May on orders of Henri. Papal and Colonna troops skirmished in the summer, but Guise could not help the Pope as news from Flanders reached him and he had to return home. Alba jumped on the occasion and arrived under the walls of Rome. A lenient peace was finally reached between Spain and the Pope. The conflict in Italy would continue on a smaller scale in Piedmont, Corsica, Emilia and Siena up until 1558. Guise's campaign in Naples was stopped because of the situation on the French northern front. King Philip had assembled an enormous army for the time, numbering over 50,000 troops from Germany, the Netherlands, Spain and Italy, under the command of the young Duke of Savoy, Emanuele Filiberto. Also, the English would join the war on the Spanish side with 7,000 men, as their Queen, Mary of England, had married Philip of Spain in 1554. The Duke started his operations in June, heading towards Champagne, intending to draw the French army there, to then sharply turn west and invest the fortress of Saint-Quentin with his vanguard, the main fortress of Vermandois. The French defense was coordinated by Constable Montmorency, who managed to only assemble an army of around 20,000 infantry, more than half German mercenaries, and 6,000 horses, as most of the best French soldiers were in Piedmont and Latium. The Spanish army began to siege the city on the 2nd of August, building trenches and batteries. The governor of Picardy, Admiral of France Gaspard de Coligny, barely managed to enter the town in the night between the 2nd and 3rd of August, forcing a weak point in the encirclement with half of his forces, the other getting lost in the dark. The city of Saint-Quentin lay on the northern bank of the river Somme, which ran in smaller streams surrounded by marshes, an impossible barrier for an army. Savoy positioned his army along the main roads into the city, with a Spanish contingent taking over the southern suburbs without much problem and blockading the bridge over the Somme, thus cutting the communications between the 1,000 defenders and the main army. Montmorency had stationed his army at La Fère, south of the town, and attempted the following night to reinforce the garrison. This failed, as captured knights revealed the attempt, and on the night of the 3rd, the reinforcements meant for the city under Saint-André were met by a salvo of arquebus fire. In a somewhat desperate and certainly daring attempt, Montmorency ordered an advance on the night of the 9th of August. His plan was to take advantage of a section of clear river water to the west and ferry some of his troops to under the walls. On the morning of the 10th, the infantry arrived at the location with their 6 or 7 large boats, while the cavalry harassed the Spanish contingent to the south of the city, which fortified itself in the suburb of Faubourg-de-Lille. There was a small fort to the north of Saint-Quentin at Rouvois, which Montmorency had considered not big enough to be of great importance, so he sent only a squadron of German reiters, pistoliers on horseback. The French began to slowly embark on their boats, while a few field pieces began to shoot across the river towards an enemy encampment. But the muddy embankments and marshy terrain hindered operations, slowing them down to a crawl. After a few hours, only 450 men had entered into the city, while others drowned, were stuck in the dirt, or got lost. The Duke of Savoy, after the initial surprise, quickly ordered his cavalry to assemble to the east of the city. Here they rapidly traversed the ford at Rouvois, scattering the reiters before the French cavalry, who were meant to reinforce them, could arrive. Having received the news, Montmorency ordered to abandon the transport operation and to have the infantry retreat, while the cavalry would screen them. Montmorency joined his men and observed his enemies. The Spanish waited for all of their cavalry to have traversed the river and began to line up, threatening to encircle the French, who retreated. A few kilometers south of the river, Montmorency and his men, outnumbered, were finally intercepted by the Dutch and German light cavalry. The general made a last charge and was captured, while many others scattered and were hunted down. After disposing of the cavalry, the Spanish arrived at the infantry columns and attacked them on the flanks. The footmen broke down into smaller pike units that were harassed by the Spanish reiters and finally broke when cannons were brought up to their position. Many French tried to run but were butchered. The French army suffered between 12 and 18,000 casualties, half of them captured, while the Spanish casualties were negligible. After the great victory, the Duke of Savoy wanted to head straight to Paris, but his king ordered instead to continue the siege. Gaspard de Coligny desperately held out for 2 more weeks, when the town was taken by assault on the 27th of August after a ferocious bombardment, and Coligny was captured, but his resistance took long enough for the campaign to run out of steam. In September, to the surprise of everyone, Philip ordered his army to retreat and abandoned his advance on Paris. The Duke of Guise, now back from Naples, spent the autumn raiding north of Champagne. This was a ploy to distract the Spanish from the real objective, and in the winter of 1557–58, he attacked the Netherlands. In January, he took Calais from the English after a short siege, reconquering the last English territory on the continent. In June, he took Thionville from the Spanish. The French resurgence, however, ended at the town of Gravelines, where a French force under De Terme was annihilated at the hands of the Spanish army in the Netherlands after a raiding operation. A large imperial army advanced in July from the north and placed itself along the river Somme, opposite the French army, but neither side took any action for a few months. Both sides were exhausted, and a truce was signed in October 1558, a month after Charles V had died in Extremadura, who had been an obstacle for peace. Peace was reached on the 3rd of April 1559 in the Treaty of Cateau-Cambresis. Henri had to give up all of his possessions and claims in Italy, except for Saluzzo, and evacuate his troops in Italy and Luxembourg. Emanuele Filiberto of Savoy was reinstated to his duchy with all of his lands, though he had to marry Henri's sister, and some fortresses remained in French hands. In exchange, the French crown was allowed to keep Calais and the 3 bishoprics. No mention was made of the many exiles from Naples, Milan and Florence in the French court, who were not allowed to return to their homes. So ended the Italian Wars, 65 years of nearly uninterrupted conflicts on the Italian peninsula that completely upset the political landscape of the region. France, whose King Henri would die in the summer in a tournament accident, would soon be engulfed in a brutal religious civil war, while Philip had more than enough work to do to keep his realm together. We're planning to make a full-length video on the Italian Wars, covering the events that we've missed, and more videos on the era are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.